The sun had settled down in the mist of the horizon, taking a last look at the world before coming to rest at the end of the day. Its rays caressed upon the purple hills far to the east before they became a memory. Celestia let her mind relax, bidding her charge to sleep, soon to be joined by the world with lit. Until called forth began the next day. The sensation through the tingling in her spine, as it always did, had done hundreds and thousands of days before it would again. As far as the furniture in her mind would be conceived, the days were as the tick of the clock, steadily, regular, pulsing, dependable, eternal. This was way of the universe, regularly on a scale which changed with the age of the creature whom it spoke. Celestia could see these tiny repeating intervals in the hum of insects, all the way up to the slow changes in the flow of rivers and the rise and fall of the mountains. Luna could see the things as well, from the flicker of the fireflies to the slow rotation of galaxies, and Celestia could see it in the beating of her sister's heart, and the somewhat lower undulations of Luna's mercurial moods. These changes, these regular eddies and shifts were a comfort to Celestia. They were things that would count on and measure her world by. Cycles, which told her the change meant the sameness, and the world she loved could be counted on to remain by her side as always. But now the cadence of the clock had changed, the ticking slowed, and the quiet tiredness misted in her eyes. Time to get some rest if it were to be an early morning. Just before dawn, she would travel down to Ponyville to meet with her most faithful student, Twilight Sparkle. There was a magic ahoof, and Celestia knew Twilight would be excited to be involved. Celestia would perform the miracle of daybreak anywhere she chooses, but she liked her private balcony best. She had performed the ritual there so many times that the place had almost sacred quality to it. It was no secret that tomorrow, though, she and Twilight had planned a celebration for the citizens of Ponyville, the first part of which she would involve Celestia raising the sun from Friendship Castle, where her student Princess Twilight Sparkle resided. Ponyville had been in the sight of so many Equestria's triumphs, to say nothing of its status as a home to its elements of harmony. It had a richly earned honors Celestia wished to bestow upon it. For the trip to Ponyville, Celestia had elected to issue the casual chariot ride and the teleportation in favor of the pre-dawn light. The trip from Canterlot to Ponyville was almost completely downhill at any rate. She would need to do is spread her wings and glide down from the mountain to make the trip. Truth be told, this was Celestia's favorite hour of the day, in part the anticipation of the sunrise, which Celestia had never viewed as a chore. She had a deep and abiding relationship with the sun, and as always grateful to be able to see the object in her sigil and the start of every day. It was also Celestia's first chance to see the day to see of her sister, as she lowered the moon and sat down into the morning meal they happily shared before she headed off to sleep. It was a wonderful time of day for many reasons. The cool dawn breeze, the magic of the sky at time of the morning, the stars glowing their brightness at those moments, before they sought to the serenity of the daylight's rest. Celestia closed her eyes as she glided on the blue breeze, taking in the heavy scent of wildflowers mingled with that of a newly mown hay in the pastures below. Celestia breathed it all in, smiled, and then she glanced at the brightly glowing stars one last time before touching down in front of Twilight's castle. The scent of strong coffee, wafting past Celestia as she opened the doors and strode inside, told her that Spike was up attending his duties. "Hello, Princess," he chirped as he walked past her, coffee tray in hand, heading the way to the sitting room. It was more than a relaxing setting than the huge staging area of the large static table. There was a true coffee table, along with sofas, cushions, and other fineries. arranged by rarity, naturally lending the room in the air of informality and comfort. Celestia sat on one of the large cushions and relaxed, as Spike poured out a measure of Twilight's preferred Saddle Arabica Ponia blend into the china cup and offered it to her. "Thank you, Spike," she said with a smile. "You're welcome, Princess. I'll go get Twilight." Spike shared that particular mix of emotions that the general populace usually have. Love for the princess is tempered with a sort of muted internal terror of the power they had held, a nervous sort of happiness. One was simultaneously elated and horrified upon the sunrise, meeting the upper extremes of royalty, though oddly that tapered off some of the measure of disgust any further one moved from the throne. No one really feared the meeting with Prince Blueblood, for example. They avoided for other reasons. Celestia was sipping her coffee as Twilight walked softly into the room, admiring the regularity and the sheer beauty of the Princess Twilight. Despite being royalty herself, she had the extreme version of what the common pony felt like upon meeting Celestia. On the one hoof, she was the most avoided subject of the princess ever had, loving Celestia more than anything, or any pony in Equestria. She positively glowed in Celestia's presence. On the other hand, that very devotion made her fearful, and the imagined circumstances by her beloved ruler. Usually, though, the love and devotion won out, and she was simply bubbly. "Oh, Princess," Twilight bubbled. "I'm so excited. You choosing Ponyville for this ceremony is such an honor." Celestia smiled warmly. "Well, Twilight, there is hardly any ever more deserving setting. I think you would agree that Ponyville has been something in front of the line against the various problems in our nation has faced, and we have honored the elements at many times in Canterlot ceremonies, but I think the citizens of Ponyville deserve a special honor to themselves." She leaned in conspiratorially, "and it might be a tad difficult to bring down itself to the castle for the ceremony." She let out a small giggle, which made Twilight smile. Then Twilight's smile softened as she said, "I've always thought Ponyville's proximity of the ever-free forest keeps us ready for any magical troubles. It seems to have an endless supply of craziness at the ready." "No doubt," Celestia replied, "and that will continue to be the case for some time, I am sure." Twilight had a puzzled, distant look on her face. "Why do you suppose it is, Princess, that the boundary of the forest sits here, so well defended, and yet neither advances nor retreats from us?" "From us?" Celestia asked. "Oh, Twilight, you surely have gleaned by now, and now we are a part of it and is a part of us, or rather we are all part of the same as whole." "I am a part of the Everfree Forest?" Twilight asked, failing to disguise her own sarcasm. "Which part exactly?" Celestia smiled sadly before it bent violently. "Perhaps this is time, Twilight, that you were my student once more for a few hours at least. When we have completed the ceremony this morning, I think you and I should walk down to the Everfree Forest and explore the matter together." Celestia saw that Twilight was deeply puzzled, but decided not to say anything further about it for the time being. After all, it was nearly time for the ceremony. Twilight peered down from the balcony where Celestia was to raise the sun. There was quite a throng of the local populace already assembled down below. Spike walked along them handing out candles. It was a ceremony, after all, and Twilight wanted the residents of Ponyville to be an active part of it. With it, just a few minutes ago, before the sun was to be raised, almost all of Ponyville was gathered below with anticipation, including the element barriers. Everyone felt it was important that they would be seen as a vital part of Ponyville, as in turn Ponyville was the vital of the elements in all of Equestria. As Twilight walked out onto the balcony, assembled the ponies, clutched in their candles tightly, and listened intently. "Citizens of Ponyville, and my friends, companions, and elements, welcome to Ponyville's first ceremony of light." A roar of approval went up in the crowd. "It is so good to see you all gathered here together. Just so you have come together, so many times before the crisis, we all have faced as citizens, both this town and Equestria as a whole. Equestria owes a great debt to Ponyville and its citizens for bearing the brunt of so many of the terrible catastrophes we have faced together. In that recognition that fact, Princess Celestia has elected us to use our fair haired town as the sites of today's past brazen sun, a token of the esteem that she and all people of Equestria feel us free. Please let us all join in the celebration together. The crowd erupted again in cheers of approval. My beloved assistant Spike has distributed candles amongst you. He also holds one, which is now lit. I ask that one of you light your candle from his, and each of you in the light another of those other light others, and so on, doing the share of light of friendship throughout the whole town. With that, Twilight backed off the balcony, and Princess Celestia strode out regularly. Once again, the crowd exploded with a huge cheer. Beloved Ponyville, she began, I humbled by the graciousness that has been shown to me and my sisters for these past years. You have been a light to each other, to Equestria, and to the ends of our great land, and sacrifices you have made allowed us to not only survive, but to flourish as a nation. It is a great privilege and pure joy not being able to raise the sun with among such wonderful, loving, and giving community. Citizens of Ponyville, lift your candles high. The roar this time was deafening. As the candles were raised, suddenly a bright light shone upon the balcony, and Celestia's golden regalia glowed brilliantly. As she bowed her head, the crowd went silent. A soft glow began on her horn, that slowly intensified until it shone more brightly than all the candles combined. In a sudden moment, her horn flashed, flooding the whole countryside with light. The candles were all suddenly extinguished as the sun rose to the sky. The candles dropped from the ponies' hooves as they were suddenly forgotten the incredible display of light. The ponies cheered all loudly and stomped their hooves in joy. The sun shone brightly in the cloudless sky, and Celestia and Twilight beamed from the balcony. Suddenly a band began pouring out music, and Pinkie Pie was rushing everywhere, stuffing cupcakes into ponies' mouths, whooping and dancing. Balloons were released, all of them golden like the sun, and a party began which the likes of Ponyville had not seen in some time. Celestia and Twilight retired back to the castle to relax and have another cup of coffee. A bit later that morning, Celestia and Twilight found themselves beyond the outskirts of Ponyville. At the edge of Everfree Forest, we left pretty suddenly, Twilight said. Won't we be missed? Twilight, Celestia replied, a twinkle in her eye. We are princesses. We are expected to be needed elsewhere. Besides, I think they will be quite happy without us. That appeared to be quite a party, and I know parties aren't exactly your favorite functions. You have me there, Twilight admitted. But what did you wish to discuss? Well, that very thing, actually, said Celestia. We are both princesses, or rather that we are both alicorns. Twilight looked puzzled. Celestia continued. There are many things in particular to alicorns, Twilight. For one, we share a particular kind of very powerful magic. How much do you want to know about the Everfree? How much it became the way it is? Twilight looked thoughtful. Well, I know it is somehow a result of your battle that you had with Luna at the castle of the two sisters. A serene but somber look came into Celestia's eyes, almost pensive. Yes, that is true, but it is also the result of her banishment. What? Twilight was incurious. Indeed, Celestia continued. The magic that you, I, and Luna and Cadence share is the continuum of sorts. There was a specific amount of it us controls. It is finely balanced. Only during times of extreme duress can be balanced and shifted, as our battle with the centaur trek. Oh, now I remember that. Twilight stared at the ground beneath her hooves. Seeing you powerless was one of the most horrible experiences in my life. Ah, yes, Twilight, Celestia smiled. But a magical friendship saved us from that, did it not? Celestia remembered how the ponies had resisted reforming Discord, and how it all paid off, not just with Trick, but many times as battle with the changelings. It did, Twilight said, grinning up at her mentor. But what does it have to do with the Everfree? It is the balance of alicorn magic that I referred to, Twilight. Each of us carries a very special part of that. When I banished my sister to the moon, all the magic that she was expending in her battle with me became suddenly lost to her. On the moon she had no powers. Twilight frowned. But what happened to... And suddenly she understood. All of Luna's magic, all of it, had escaped into the surrounding forest, where they had remained there for thousands of years. Yes, Twilight, all of it. It was though she had rested on her student's mind. That is why it's so important for you to have the final battle with Nightmare Moon in the castle of two stepsisters. When the Nightmare Moon returned, she regained most of her power, but when she transformed back into Luna, she had to be in a place where she lost all of her power and could be reabsorbed, so she could be whole, a true alicorn once more. Much of Nightmare Moon's power came back to the fact that she was so evil. Evil is a dark power into itself. Luna needed to be her true and good alicorn magic back. But, Twilight asked with a quizzical look, if Luna's taken back her magic, why is the Everfree still the Everfree? Influence, Twilight. That much pure alicorn magic left us behind in its own magical residue. It is not that Luna's magic was fraught full of all these changes, but with its pure unbounded power, even after the magic was taken, the results of that power remained. You know that fandom energy that only one quasi-sense state when it resides its host? Well, yes, Twilight replied. That's fairly basic magic mechanics. Magic is the only transformative or effective in the state of flow. That's why we have horns, to direct that flow. And what do you imagine perhaps to that flow when the pony producing it simply vanishes? Well, Twilight considered, I guess it would have to extend the boundary of its intensity and return to the pony who... Celestia looked at her lovingly student. Exactly, Twilight. It would have nowhere to go. It would return to the point of origin and then rebound back out, but then back in. It would form a never-ending cycle of phromatic energy, ebbing and flowing. It would not be directed at anything, so it would intact and with no changes of its own. But it would pulse forever in a magical rhythm, a rhythm which lasted in this case for thousands of years, until it was retaken by Luna, the moment you set her free from the nightmare. Without warning, Celestia scooped up the smaller purple alicorn into a great bear hug and kissed her on her forehead. Oh, Twilight, I loved you so much for giving my sister back to me. I can never repay you for that. Twilight was quite startled and blushed pink as Celestia set her back down on her hooves. You already see princesses 1,000 times over, before and after her return. Besides, Luna did not just return to you. She returned to all of us. Equestria is rich indeed to both have you. To have us all Twilight princesses and subjects alike. Celestia composed herself for a moment, then spoke again. But again, the reason for our visit here. What do you think of how phonic resonance? Well, and such as any pony, I suppose, Twilight replied. She was not being boastful. She truly did outclass any other pony on the subject of magic. Only the princesses with 1 eons of experience, or perhaps a star swirl, the bearded cloud equal to her. It appeared to be studied fairly well. Magic originates as a direct flow, but it can also be captured and reflected by certain crystals, allowing certain renaissance. But it requires incredible power to sustain, and no practical applications have ever been found of it. How about impractical ones? Inquired Celestia. Have you studied phonic indunciance, for example? Well, that would really be impractical, Twilight snorted. I mean, just think of the energy requirements necessary to produce anything of that. She stopped, dead in her tracks, considering the implications of what she had just been told. You don't mean... Precisely, Twilight. Luna's powerful magic created such renaissance, lasting of thousands of years, that induced of resonance within the forest itself, extending precisely to the boundaries of Luna's original projection, and that is what the powers of the Everfree. Twilight was very quiet, and she considered all the ramifications of this. All the strange magic of the Everfree forest, empowered by an internal oscillating spell, began thousands of years ago. All of the beasts, the vegetation, and the shifting past and corridors of magic, the weaver of all of the powers by that renaissance. Wow! In that moment, the single dull exclamation was all she could summon. They walked in silence for several minutes, then Celestia posed a question. Twilight, have you ever wondered how it is I can walk in the Everfree without to pause and every very concern of my surroundings? Well, no, Twilight answered, but you are the princess. I had just assumed that there was some privilege to your existence. Celestia's laughter was like a clear crystal bell. Ha ha, my student, you have given me far too much credit. No, that is by means no answer. Is because I know the rhythm of the forest. The what? Asked Twilight. The forest has a rhythm, Twilight, or at least the initiated magic of it does, and it's indetectable. You can use a pause spell to counteract it. If you match the pulse correctly within the forest, then you can render any magic produced by it ineffective. But now that you're an alicorn, I want to teach you that. You now share the magic necessary to make the corrections and counteract it. How, princess? Twilight was astonished and insanely curious. Do you not trust me, Twilight? Celestia asked with the slightest of smiles. It was truly a bizarre question. Twilight thought, who could possibly she trust more? That's a silly question, princess. And yet, Twilight, I asked it. We employ our minds. So many times we advance to the very edge of that which can be fought, which can be considered, knowing that there's nothing further that we can ever imagine. And now, nevertheless, that the truth has not run out, it has not been exhausted. But there are other ways of crossing that boundary into the realm of transcendent. Ways to not do involve simple things. Is this something you know, Twilight? It is something which goes without saying friendships. It is something in which you cannot look into the mind of a true friend grasp. Which surely, I'm looking at it metamorphically. Through the eyes, you can come now to know more truly who you are, and discover the hidden things about yourself, and the transcendence is which we know exists without any direct knowledge of it. So, Twilight, do you really trust me with all of your heart? So this time Twilight thought long hard about what she had been asked. She thought about it every interaction that she ever had with Celestia, in which might beg the question. She thought about it many times where she had to rely solely on Celestia, when no other venue was available to her. She thought about Celestia's interactions with other ponies, with being other beings of sort. She thought about whatever she trusted all of Celestia's words, and that in all the cases. At the end, it was all far too much to consider, so Twilight reduced it all to one single thought. She would gladly and without question gave her own life for Celestia, unreservedly and without a second thought. And she replied simply, Yes, Celestia, I do. She rarely ever used the word princess directly named at her. She did now use it for emphasis. Celestia nodded. Stand here, she said, indicated a spot, and then she turned and walked a few steps into the forest, before turning back to face Twilight. Now, Twilight, touch your horn with mine. Puzzled, Twilight did as Celestia asked. Now I want you to concentrate with all of your might, and transfer all of your magic into me. Don't stop until you're completely drained of it. Do this as I've asked for it. Twilight had no idea why the princess was asking this for her, but it did not matter. She had already considered the issue. She trusted the princess completely. As she did, she was asked, she immediately felt her magic begin to drain away. But the sensation only lasted a few seconds. It stopped and began to flow back to her horn, reversing the process. It then began to flow out again. Before long, it settled into the steady rhythm. And oddly, it was a rhythm that she had known her entire life. She had no consciousness memory of it, and yet, though it was a dear old friend who had never left her side, Celestia stepped back and smiled. Welcome to the club, Twilight. Suddenly, Twilight truly understood the magic she had shared with the other alicorns, and she was completely aware of the rhythm of the forest. There was no fear here for her, only peace. Nothing in the forest could touch her unless she allowed it. Celestia came over to Twilight and draped a wing around her precious student. It can only work if you gave yourself to me completely, without a reservation. The windows to the soul are very small, only trust and love may pass. Twilight smiled and took it all in. All the thousands of years of magic and the void of left. It filled Luna's passing and return, the tentacles reaching down to the Tartarus itself. The magic of heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars. It was a lot to progress. Celestia gave her the time she needed. When she eventually saw Twilight relax into her new position, she spoke. So Twilight, would you like to go and visit with Sakura for a bit? I think there are some things she could do to this discussion. Twilight shook her head a bit and took a bit to release some of the magic fog she had gathered there. So how does she manage to exist in here? Don't tell me she uses alicorn magic as well. Celestia chuckled. No, Twilight, but she does use a method which mirrors our own in some ways. Well, certainly I would love to visit her. I haven't seen her in ages. They walked together through the woods, in step with the magical rhythm. After what is fairly a short walk, they had arrived at Sakura's cottage. She lived within the boundaries of the Everfree after all, but not too far inside them. The abode of Sakura resembled Twilight's old library home when it was nestled in the trunk of a huge tree. The resemblance ended there. There was a gloomy, thick atmosphere about the place. The general darkness of the forest was a large part of that, but there were also no lanterns hanging about, as well as the strange-looking vines and ceremonial masks, and the whole place resembled a giant, unpleasant face. Celestia knocked. The door opened to reveal a smiling Sakura. Ah, the princess, and her best student too, she intoned in her sing-song voice. It's always nice and a joy to see you. She ushered the both of them inside. Twilight beamed. There were a few places they unveiled her magic venom with Sakura's cottage. Racks of magical potions lined the walls. There were even more masks, candles, and other magical lights, and smoking incense scattered about. In the center of the room was a large cauldron, filled with a mysterious green liquid. A fire was blown from the cauldron, heating the contents, but it magically produced into a smoke of its own. Sakura looked at her visitors quizzically. It brings me so much pleasure that you both come to visit, but isn't the chance I implored you know it is? Not at all, Celestia replied. We have a very special purpose for our visit, for I just made Twilight aware of the rhythm of the forest. Sakura's eyes widened as she looked at the purple pony with a new measure of respect. Well then, this is indeed a suspicious event. It is not every day that such knowledge is lent, but then it is just not alone, as I see, for a true alicorn that stands before me. She looked up Twilight up and down. I sense in you now the imperial of the call of the rhythm of life, which does run through us all. You are very perceptive. Celestia laughed. I wanted Twilight to truly understand the rhythm of Everfree, so I can think of no better way than for you to explain your part in it. Twilight was now truly mystified by the conversation. So you aren't an alicorn, and you are part of the rhythm? How is that possible? Sakura accesses the rhythms in the other way, Twilight, Celestia said. Perhaps you have noticed that she always speaks in rhymes? It is commonly known that my last words all rhyme, added Sakura. But what pony folk miss is a sense of time. The time? Asked Twilight. The time of day? No, my student. Celestia laughed once more. Sakura is seeking for of timing. Most ponies think all Zeeperkins speak in rhyme, but it is simply not so. Sakura does so by preserve her way of life here in Everfree Forest, but it is not the rhythm which is important. The rhymes merely serve the purpose of keeping the meter of the words correct. She could speak with the rhythm alone, but it would be more difficult and more dangerous for her. Some musical ponies did not precise the rhythm of her speech, but only hear the rhyming words. I think I may be beginning to understand, said Twilight, but only a little. Celestia nodded. Let us have Sakura explain it to us, Twilight, and as she speaks, call upon the rhythm of the forest within you, and note that the peculiar sense of familiarity in her words. Sakura began. In the days of my youth in a land far away, I stood on the beach and looked out at the bay, upon ships of merchants who back then did trade, and I thought that with them fortune might be made. I had no dreams of riches or fortunes of gold, but if I did think of myself with my nature so bold, then might seek out a place in the world not seen, where the magics I sensed to would be keen. So I rode with those stallions, besotted the treasure. At this point we visit, such hard I measure the magic might of the air that I breathed, and the further I went, my hunger it seethed. But just when I thought that my dream might fall dead, though I got the wind of the place which I was led, a magical wood of which I often dreamed, but now it loomed before me, and so real it seemed. So I strode quite bodily in I entered prize, with visions of magical gems in my eyes. Only then I did stop, and looked around so quickly, and what I saw of them all became astounded. There were horrors and haunts of the possible measure, not exactly the best sort of thing for my pleasure. I began to see quickly of the path of despair that might just lay before me if I should stay there. But I wanted the magic that, ever so strong, lay once in my grasp. I did tarry along. So then I resolved that this place would be home, after spending long years in my magical realm. But I needed a way to survive that was shown, to stay and grow, to make this forest my own. I wanted it all of this forest has shown me. I had to own it so that it would not own me. I had my disposal of numerous things, potions, elixirs, and magical rings, which I brought aboard all of the ships, and had failed me so far from my home, of my future had veiled me. Strong these magics I had brought from my home, and I have learned everything from the glamour and tone, and which I did read on this magical voyage at sea, and which now I would use well and serve me. So I set myself up in this magical cottage, and lit up a fire with no smoke and with a great wattage, to set bubbling a great and quite magical brew. Into that pot of my potions did stew. I knew I had power enough to make it good on my calm and magical home in this world, but there was yet a thread of which I had no pluck. It seemed to I have stopped my goal, and was stuck. The evils without it I felt grew it come near. I knew they would soon knock on my door and be here. At this moment, Zecora knocked loudly on the door with her steering stick, and Twilight nearly jumped out of her skin. Celestia and Zecora both laughed, and Twilight sheepishly grinned. The cauldron bubbled quietly. Zecora continued unbated. I had felt some time after that thing being lurked, a rhyme or a tune that had kept my ears perked. So I cast aside fear and went to a trance, an odd sort of thing with an upside-down stance. As I chanted my mantra and peered in the dark, I began to see I had brightened a spark. Something in threads of wisdom of me did appear, of beasts and the terrors I had no fear. It had been slow my mantra which showed me the way, and the same rhythm which I use today. When combined right with the bindings of potions and herbs, rhythm now keeps me safely with these nouns and verbs. Zecora did a half bow, half courteously in the princess. I felt it, princess, Twilight exclaimed gleefully. I felt the rhythm in the forest of Zecora's words. Celestia smiled at her student, a defiant glint of admiration in her eyes. I was certain you would, Twilight, all beyond all doubt, for I have come to know myself through your eyes, just as you have done. I am sure Zecora has done so well. Zecora's expression was likewise joyful. It is, as she said, my remarkable friend, that the rewards of friendship exist without an end. And you have taught me so much things throughout life that you live, and there is a great depth of the knowledge you give. Celestia then smiled warmly at both Zecora and Twilight. Yes, my beloved and faithful student, Zecora, has managed to find the rhythm of the forest as well, and has accessed it in the way that probably no creature would be, having not disciplined themselves in the arts of potion magic and transcendence as Zecora has. This is what I meant when I spoke earlier of the transcendent parts of existence. There is wisdom beyond all knowledge to some. It is love. To others is a dream. Now, for both of you, let us share the potions and stories deep into the night. For good friends are truly the treasure of this world, and together they did that precisely that. What's up, my pretties? it's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.